Hello, everyone. I'm Leah,
And I'm Van.
and today we will be discussing dialectical behavioral therapy prolonged exposure, PE. To begin, DBT usually begins with a few sessions of pre-treatment, which are designed to assess treatment goals, orient the clients to DBT, determine whether DBT is a good fit, and obtain a commitment to participate in treatment. Assess the client's goals by asking what would need to change in their lives for them to want to be alive, ensuring to make the goals specific. The takeaway is to have a list of treatment targets that together the therapist and the client have identified as important for them to have a lively experience as worth living. Orienting to DBT by describing DBT's theoretical foundations, modes of treatment, skills-oriented focus, structure, rules, and requirements. Obtain commitment by having the client commit to reducing suicidal behavior, for example, staying alive for the entire duration of treatment, working towards a goal that is compatible with life.
Now, incorporating the prolonged exposure, we want to assess PTSD by screening at baseline. This would include using measurements such as the PTSD checklist for DSM-5, and we want to orient to PTSD. This could look like providing general handouts on what post-traumatic stress disorder is to provide information on its diagnostic criteria and its impact on one's life. We want to assess which symptoms are most intense and how PTSD might be contributing to other problems one might be experiencing. Additionally, we want to establish reducing PTSD as a treatment goal. This handout here could be beneficial for going into what PTSD is in relation to each criterion. This handout is useful in understanding what is traumatic invalidation, and this one can be used for its subsequent impact.
Orienting to DBT-BE itself. Make completing DBT-BE an explicit part of the treatment plan. See general handout 4 about what's DBT-BE. Clarify a contingency that clients must achieve a period of abstinence, at least 2 months in outpatient settings and 1 month in intensive or residential treatment setting, from all forms of suicidal and non-suicidal self-injury. The key points are: 1. Avoidance is a primary factor that maintains PTSD, including avoidance of trauma-related emotions, thoughts, and situations. 2. Although avoidance works in the short run to reduce the stress, in the long run it maintains PTSD by preventing corrective learning. 3. DBT-BE works by gradually approaching trauma memories and situations so that you can learn that they are safe and can be tolerated, which will make them less distressing. DBT-BE, that's 4, uses in vivo exposure, approaching avoided but situations in real life, and imaginal exposure, repeatedly telling the story of the trauma out loud, followed by processing, talking about and evaluating trauma-related beliefs and emotions to treat PTSD. Lastly, DBT-BE and exposure therapy more broadly is effective in reducing PTSD and improving overall functioning for most clients. This is the handout that could be beneficial to help through that conversation.
So the protocol itself includes reviewing the DBT diary card, setting the session agenda, orienting to the treatment rationale and procedures, conducting the trauma interview, and selecting the first target trauma, obtaining and strengthening commitments, completing the post-exposure DBT skills plan, and assigning homework. For the rationale for the treatment, we will offer an example of the client Maria. Maria is a 25-year-old single white woman who was referred to DBT after a serious suicide attempt via overdose on acetaminophen that resulted in a psychiatric hospitalization. Maria's primary reason for seeking therapy was to stop feeling miserable all the time and be able to have relationships. She has met diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder, PTSD, major depression, bulimia nervosa, and social anxiety disorder.
The following example would provide an illustrations of how to orient clients to the factors that maintain PTSD using the case of Maria. So to begin, I'll take the role of the therapist and Van will be Maria. The first thing I want to do today is to make sure you understand what is keeping your PTSD going. Let's start by looking at DBT BE handout 1. Do you see the oval at the top that says problematic beliefs?
Yes.
These are problematic things you learned as a result of trauma that influence how you think and feel about things in your life now. For example, what did your traumatic experiences teach you to believe about yourself?
That I'm a bad person who always messes things up and makes people angry at me. If I hadn't been such a bad kid, my dad wouldn't have abused me. And the same thing happened with my boyfriend. I was always doing things wrong that made him mad, and that's why he raped me. It makes me hate myself.
Yes, people with PTSD often think they are bad or incomplete, and they usually blame themselves for the traumas they experience. For the record, it makes me sad to hear that you say those things about yourself. We are definitely going to have to work on changing how you think about yourself.
Okay.
So, in addition to thinking negatively about yourself, trauma also teaches people to think negatively about other people and the world. For example, survivors of interpersonal trauma, like you, often believe that other people can be trusted and that people are likely to harm or reject them. In general, people with PTSD often believe they must be on guard all the time because dangerous things could happen at any moment.
Yeah, that's me. That's why I avoid people, especially men. I just think they're gonna do something to hurt me or that they won't like me. When I leave the house, I'm always looking all around to try to make sure I'm safe.
That's really common. Okay, the final type of problematic belief is related to how people think about their emotions. Often people believe that emotions are dangerous, they can't tolerate them, and they are likely to lose control or be rejected if they allow themselves to get emotional.
Oh, you know that I don't like emotions. I feel like my emotions are so intense that I'll go crazy if I let myself feel them for too long.
Okay, you can clearly identify with these common types of problematic beliefs. So what happens is that these beliefs influence your reactions to things you encounter in everyday life, particularly things that remind you of your traumas. Do you see the next box that says trauma cue?
Yeah.
Trauma cues can be internal, like your own thoughts and memories about your trauma, or they can be external situations that remind you of your trauma. As an example, what reactions do you typically have when a memory of your dad abusing you comes into your mind?
I get really anxious and ashamed. I feel like I want to climb out of my skin.
Right. So those trauma memories bring up uncomfortable emotions and sensations. What thoughts do you usually have, either about your trauma memory or your emotional reactions to it?
It makes me start thinking about how bad and how disgusting I am.
Okay, so then what usually happens?
I just feel like I can't tolerate it. So I try to distract myself and push the thoughts out of my head. In the past, when the memories got intense, I would self-harm to try to make them stop.
Yes, distraction is a very common strategy people use to avoid thoughts and emotions related to past trauma. And self harm can be one way to distract yourself. So what happens if a distressing trauma memory comes into your mind and then you distract yourself?
I usually feel better, at least for a while, but the memory always comes back eventually.
Exactly. Avoidance provides temporary relief, but it doesn't keep the thoughts or emotions away in the long run. They always come back, and often they get more frequent and intense the more you try to avoid them.
I know, but it's still hard to stop myself from avoiding in the moment.
Of course, avoidance has become a habit that is hard to resist. So if you always respond to trauma memories by pushing them out of your head, does that make you feel more or less confident in your ability to tolerate them?
It makes me feel like I can't handle thinking about what happened, like I have to avoid it.
Right. And what about those beliefs that you are bad and disgusting? Do those change if you avoid thinking about your abuse?
No, I still think those are true.
And that's the crux of the problem. If you avoid thinking about your trauma, then you can't learn anything new about it. That means you will continue to believe that you cannot tolerate thinking about it and that you are bad and disgusting because of what your dad did to you. As long as you are avoiding, those problematic beliefs that are fueling your PTSD are going to stay stuck. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see that.
Good. Now let's apply this model to an example of an external trauma cue. Can you think of a recent time that you encountered something in the world that reminded you of your trauma?
I went grocery shopping yesterday, and when I came out of the store, there was a man standing near my car. You know that I hate being near men.
Yes, which is understandable given that you have been harmed by multiple men in your life. So seeing the man near your car was a trauma cue. Now use the handout to walk me through what happened.
Okay, well, my interpretation was that he must be planning to attack me and that I wasn't safe. I felt afraid and my heart was racing. I think I just immediately went into fight or flight. That happens when I feel threatened.
It sounds like this was an intense trauma cue. Did you do anything to make yourself feel safer or less afraid?
I put my keys in between my fingers so that I could use them to hurt him if he came near me. And then I walked to my car, threw my bags in as quickly as I could without making eye contact. As soon as I got in my car, I locked all my doors and just drove away.
So you used a variety of avoidance behaviors, including holding your keys as a potential weapon, avoiding eye contact, locking your doors, and driving away as quickly as you could. Can you tell me how these kinds of avoidance behaviors keep your PTSD going?
Well, they only give me temporary relief. If I saw another man today who was standing near my car, I would still be just as afraid.
That's right. Avoidance only works to get short-term relief. The emotions are still going to be there in the long run. How did avoidance prevent new learning?
I guess by leaving the situation quickly, I didn't have a chance to find out if he was actually going to attack me.
Exactly. That's entirely possible that he was just an innocent man who was going grocery shopping and had no ill intentions toward you. But avoidance made it impossible for you to learn if your interpretations were accurate.
I can see that, but I still think that was a reasonable reaction to a strange man being near my car.
I know you do. And that's because you haven't had enough experience yet that discomfort disconfirm your beliefs that all men are dangerous. That's something we can work on during treatment. For now, Do you feel like you understand how avoidance is maintaining those kinds of PTSD-related beliefs and emotions?
Yeah, I can see how avoidance is keeping me stuck.
Do you have any questions about it?
No, I think I got it. Thank you. So this is a handout that we walk through with the case example. And the core procedures of DBT PE work is to reduce PTSD by stopping avoidance so that new learning can occur and trauma-related emotions will decrease.
The key points in orienting to the treatment procedures are that DBT-BE works by helping clients approach rather than avoid trauma cues, so that new learning can occur and the stress will decrease. In vivo exposure is used to approach safe but avoided situations, people, and things that bring up thoughts and emotions related to trauma. Imaginal exposure is used to approach avoided trauma memories by repeatedly describing specific traumatic events out loud and in details. And processing is used to gain a new perspective on the meaning of the trauma, and it involves talking about and evaluating emotions and beliefs that are illustrated by imaginal exposure. It may be beneficial to go through DBT-BE handout 2, which describes how DBT-BE works to reduce PTSD. This handout is useful to work through how DBT-BE works to reduce PTSD by explaining the different factors that work together to improve PTSD.
So the goal here is to understand the role of behavioral avoidance in maintaining PTSD and how in vivo exposure will help to reduce PTSD. So for orienting to in vivo exposure, there are two key points. One, behavioral avoidance of people, places, and things works temporarily to reduce distress, but maintains PTSD in the long run by preventing new learning. Second, in vivo exposure works to reduce PTSD by breaking the habits of reducing distress by avoidance or escape, disconfirming beliefs about the expected outcome of exposure to avoided situations, increasing the ability to tolerate intense emotions, reducing the intensity of distress over time, also known as habituation, building mastery and confidence, and improving quality of life and increasing joy.
Next is to review any homework previously given. For this portion, you would want to review one exposure task at a time and start by open-ended questions, such as, what did you learn by completing this task? Make sure to look for patterns of potential change across repetitions, and to reinforce the client's progress if a change is occurring. If a change is not yet occurring, emphasize mastery and emotional tolerance. Look for potential increase in state dissociation and urges to engage to target exposure tasks that the client has completed.
So the goal here is to understand the role of cognitive avoidance in maintaining PTSD and how imaginal exposure and processing work to reduce PTSD. For orienting to imaginal exposure, we have cognitive avoidance, such as trauma memories or thoughts, that work temporarily to reduce distress but maintain PTSD in the long run by preventing new learning about the trauma. Then we have imaginal exposure and processing work to reduce PTSD by learning that thinking and talking about the trauma is safe, organizing the trauma memory into a coherent narrative, increasing the ability to tolerate intense emotions, reduce the intensity of distress over time, habituation, building mastery and enhancing control, gaining a new and more helpful perspective on the trauma and its meaning. So here's the reference that we used for this presentation. Thank you all for listening.